No!
They're gone?
They must have let it out of here, since the console over there is still locked. Do you think you could undock the gunship?
Not a problem.
Good, because I'm tracking 2 rigs on the move. One on the Ishimura, and another...
The USG, Ishimura.
One in the USG Ishimura, and another in the CEC facility. It could be the same pair we've been tracking.
Yeah, let's hope so.
God damn it! This damn station is cursed. Isn't there a single operational vehicle around here? It seems that works. Good.
Mother Marker, please give me something.
Hopefully there are some spare lives on board the Shimura.
Maybe the ship's engines can be powered from here? No. Oh shit! Oh, that's the stuff. Oh, thanks, Captain. Now, 3 rig signals. 1 in engineering, 2 in the flight lounge. Which one of these buttons controls the... Here we go. Check. 1 pink, 2 pink, red pink, blue pink. You guys, in the flight deck and tram platform. Assuming you aren't batshit insane right now, we need to talk. And after that, we can find a way off this damn station. Meet me in the captain's nest.
Of course it's him.
That's our guy! Come on!
Okay, where are you working? Thanks.
So, are you Helios?
Who wants to know?
Something far larger than you, and the pulp we would have found you as if my friend hadn't taken the shot.
We've been tracking you two from the government sector. You have some information we're interested in.
I'm sorry. You two?
I think she means me, Helios. You're a Cypher, Sore Eyes.
Rudy. Well, sometimes I wish I could say the same.
The waterworks are touching, but they'll have to wait. The announcement has all the necromorphs rolled up. We can shield ourselves in the captain's nest, and I can fill you in on some juicy news.
So, before we get started with the podcast episode, I have something to comment first. So, the following day after recording the session, I found out that the NVIDIA Shao Play didn't have my microphone selected, so everything that I've said during the session wasn't even captured. And I had to remember most of the parts, what I've said, and trying to recreate them, but you'll notice throughout the episode that there are going to be some gaps of the audio that are basically silent, so yeah. Luckily in this episode, compared to the previous ones, didn't talk that much and was able to somewhat fix them, but yeah. We all did said, enjoy the episode, and probably we might be in the live stream, lurking around, checking your comments, so yeah. Alright, enough intro. Brody, do your magic.
Welcome everyone to the Planet Cracker podcast. My name is Brody, the BodyCounter, and today with me, joining me today is Helios Max, which he has held me at Plasma Cutter Point to host the introduction of this podcast. And
I wanted to be a guest on this episode, but yeah, that doesn't mean that I won't be doing the editing once we're done with the session.
Yeah, fair enough. You got the bulk of the work. As always, can't wait to see what creative intro you come up with next time. This time, I mean. Excuse my early morning brain. And new guests joining us today. Calvin Parsons, and Starframe, also Anita, from the Negative Atmosphere game, like Sunscorched Studios. Oh, you guys introduce yourselves. That'd be much better.
It was difficult with you mispronouncing my last name.
Yeah, you can go first, Anita.
I'm Anita Hackstuhl. I'm the art director for Sunscorched Studios.
And I'm Calvin Parsons. I'm the CEO of Sunscorched Studios, and we're working on a sci-fi horror game called Negative Atmosphere. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to react to whatever these guys show us, as game developers and as fans.
We're very lucky to have you here. Thanks for taking up my offer in the first place.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. All right. Well, so what was your opinions, I guess, to start with when it comes to the art developer live stream? Like how many, like, did you rewatch it many times, or was it just like a watch once and, kind of get back to your own thing?
I mean, with all the kind of resources that we see with other games similar to ours that are in development, we typically analyze what they work on as closely as we can, because at the end of the day, they're games that people will compare our game to. So we want to see what they're doing differently and what they're doing that's unique, and also see if they're doing stuff that we're already doing, as kind of a form of validation. So I would say I watched the live stream at least once all the way through. I didn't watch it live because I wasn't around at the time, but I
Yeah.
did watch it afterwards on the VOD. But what I do like about what they do is they break down the key parts of the live stream into their own separate videos, and then we do analyze and break those down as a team, because there's a lot of really, really good information in there that they cut up. I do find it quite funny that they upload it on their channel first, and then IGN just take it and re-upload it again.
Classic IGN.
But yeah, so I mean, me, Anita, and I definitely looked over it because we had a good long conversation about a lot of the stuff that they talk about in there. I mean, Anita, what did you watch it more than once, or did you just watch it once through?
Well, I actually didn't completely watch it through because it was quite intimidating in length. I did watch all the separate videos on separate occasions, which they split it up into, which was really interesting. And
It's very handy they do that. They like split it up, for people who, obviously can't. I mean, well, in my case, I had to. I went to bed at like 8 o'clock at night, and woke up at 2:30 to watch the stream, like in the morning, and then
Literal Christmas Day for Brody here.
literally, I got to be on this shit to make content out of it, of course. Yeah, and also I host I host a voice chat in the Necro posting server, watching, like, we stream the live stream. Streamception.
Live reaction.
Yeah. Live Necro posting reaction. And and we watch it once through, we react to it, but then we go back and rewatch important bits that either I or other people noticed. That's kind of what we do. So yeah, but it is very handy they like split the video into little segments for those that, don't have the time to watch the full thing, and it just condenses the things people really want to see. They don't want to see all the talk, little banters here and there. They want to see the actual work in progress.
Just highlighting the important footage of the stream.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic marketing strategy, really, because you're showing content that you've already worked on anyway, but you're showing it in a way where you're being transparent about what you've worked on. It's very similar to what we've done in the past, where you do a behind the scenes, but you don't overpromise what you're showing. You just show people what you're working on and why you're working on it, and it's something that the AAA industry really hasn't done in a while. Like, most people will see the AAA games industry as big polished E3 presentations, and then the game eventually releases maybe a year later. So it gets all that hype and then the game comes out. But you never really get to see what the developers did behind it, perhaps until after the game's released.
Yeah.
Whereas I really like what they're doing with this is they're showing you that the team has the same passion, or is at least as passionate about the original development team, despite the fact of them being a completely different development team. And you can really see the level of detail and the depth they've gone into with it. Like, I know this isn't in the art live stream, but when they showed the Alive system, they were showing how they're taking what Dead Space did originally as a system, and they're expanding it and modernizing it for the modern day. And only by doing that in these live streams can people see that they're showing these systems. Because in a trailer you wouldn't notice, and you wouldn't know how much work's gone into that system. You just think it's some background audio. But the fact that they actually broke it down and showed it with the actual developers is a really nice thing to see from a AAA perspective. Because it's not very often.
I mean, as a tactic, it also builds a bit of trust back with the consumers, because the market lost that with the way they've been doing things. Being transparent with how a game is created from start to finish, and showing the ugly stages where it's only grey boxes and where it's not perfect, where it's flawed, kind of generates awareness of that stage for gamers, because previously you couldn't really, as a bigger developer, show that. because people wouldn't know what to do with it. But now through like more indie games coming on the market and being more open about it, they have that freedom now, and they
Yeah, showing
can
how.
be more open about it. Also, has the added benefit that it's cheaper as a marketing tactic. But apart from that, it's just a great thing to see from a bigger studio because normally they aren't that transparent.
Yeah, they show only the most refined level of work they've done so far and pop that into, I guess, like a trailer or something like that. The showing your game in such a vulnerable state, I was very surprised that Motive Studios want to pursue this path of promotion. I'm glad they're doing it. I just hope when it does come to trailer time, they don't spoil some of the like best moments that they've, that they're going to be remaking. Yeah, like important.
Always
Yeah,
something. Yeah, that's always something we've got to bear in mind when we do our own trailers, because it's great to show behind the scenes for a system, but if that's a system that you haven't showcased in a trailer yet, it's a lot more easy when you're doing it in a remake, for example, because people will have already played through the game's story start to finish. They know what happens,
Yeah.
they know the core content, they know the weapons. But when you're making something new that's inspired by a previous experience, the problem you face is, oh, we've got this really cool, fancy new feature, and we've just shown how it works, but we've never actually shown it in its finished state. So people now know all of the nitty gritty behind the system, but never got to get that initial wow moment. What's this and how does it work? Because you skip that entirely. And that's a very fine line to tread.
In my opinion, I'm quite happy that Motive went with this transparency approach of doing live streams to showcase some of the work that they have done during the development process. And with what they've shown so far regarding the remake, I don't know, it's quite safe to say that they are totally passionate with working on this space.
Yeah, well, transparency is fantastic. The problem is if you're too transparent, there's nothing left to reveal. And then
Yes, yeah.
it's very difficult to hype things up. In my opinion, Motive's got it quite right with what they're doing, because they've shown all the stuff that we've seen already in the original Dead Space, and any of the other like cut content they might be adding back or new enemies they might be adding back, they haven't shown. So they've shown the slasher, they've shown Isaac's new suit, but they're all based off stuff we've seen before. They're an improved, revamped version of the original assets, which is great because we can set our expectations based off the previous game. The difficulty that they will face, and you'll always face this doing a remake or something, is you're reinterpreting something that someone will already see as a masterpiece. You know, Dead Space 1 is this magnum opus of a game that some people will never want changed from the original, and they'll think anything that's different to it or reimagining it, because these are different people working on this remake compared to the original game. So obviously they're going to see things differently, even if they're given the same script. You know, if you give the same movie to a different director, it's going to look different, for better or worse. So it's really interesting to see how Motive are interpreting certain things, particularly in the art live stream, where, you know, if the original team had worked on it, they might have done something differently.
There are some ex-Visual Games developers that are part of the Motive Studios right now working on the remake, such as the art director from Dead Space 2 that was part from the latest stream.
Yeah, art director Mike.
There is, but, and I'll say this from the perspective of running a team, just because you've got a few developers from a previous experience does not mean you're going to end up with the same dynamic within the team, because just because you have 3 extra old devs that worked on the original game, if the rest of the 20 or 50 other people on your team have never worked on it before, you're going to have those 3 people advising them, but they're never going to have the same dynamic that the original team might have had with its programmers, its artists, and its sound designers, because they're completely different people. And also, they're looking at this with the benefit of hindsight. When they worked on the original Dead Space, there was nothing like it before. They were working on it for the first time. Now they've had over 10 or 15 years to reflect on what they did the first time round and if they do it differently.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the fact that a lot of the time, fans of a series actually have a better understanding of what made the game so famous and so great to begin with than the people actually worked on it. Because for the people that worked on it, they see the flaws in what they... That's something I know myself as an artist from my own work, and when I look at my old stuff, I go, oh my god, this is horrible because of this, this, and this. But seeing what actually made it resonate with people is much harder. As a fan of something, you don't have that attachment. You just go, this was really, really great. I want to replicate this.
I mean, that's definitely the outlook that we take when we're developing our own game, because we're very aware of the comparisons and the fact that we're a spiritual successor to Dead Space. It's not an accidental thing, it's very deliberate. But we're looking at that not from the fact that we worked on the original Dead Space, but that we were massive fans of that game. So we know in our eyes what made that game for us and what works and how to bring it into the 21st century and improve it and revolutionize it again. With the Dead Space remake, the difficulties that they will face is the fine line between remaster and remake. Is it making the previous game look better and play better, or is it reimagining the idea of the previous or first game in their own vision? Because what the fans want will not be the first one, it won't be the second one, it's going to kind of be one in between. So it's very difficult to know whether you're going to please everybody, and you never will please everybody. But that's what's so great, I think, about them doing that Dead Space Community Council thing, because they're clearly getting the fans, or at the very least content creators that have made content for the game, involved to help guide the developers on what the players are looking for.
It's only a shame they didn't hire me onto the council.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're basically a Dead Space expert.
Yeah. Godlike, I wouldn't go that far.
We don't know for certain who are exactly members of the council, but we can speculate who might be part of it. Like, yeah, I don't know. But jokes aside, they did propose some amazing ideas to improve the game, like regarding the immersion, the gameplay experience, and other little details that could exponentially make it different than the 2008 version. But yeah, those are just some things that I've heard. Like, don't get me like for
I mean,
Well,
there's
the
one...
good thing is that Space, from its base gameplay experience, actually plays into the strengths of, like, the engine was made for shooters. This is going to be a shooter, so they don't have to fight it every step of the way. Of course, they have to build on top of it, but at least they're not going to have to completely subvert everything and put it on its head.
Yeah, when you look at that, like, a great example is the team at BioWare Montreal took a lot of the fall with Mass Effect Andromeda because Frostbite was not built for third-person RPGs. A massive amount of the code that they did for that game will probably be part of the engine now and a part of the Dead Space remake, because BioWare Montreal had to build an entire third-person branching dialogue system. They had to build a third-person locomotion and combat system, and whilst Mass Effect Andromeda might have came out significantly, not as good as they hoped or expected it because of all the technical challenges that they faced through no fault of their own. Yeah, or Anthem, for example. The code, as proven with Anthem, it was a pretty reliable shooter. You could move around pretty reliably. The problem with Anthem was the lack of content. Well, Dead Space Remake won't suffer from that because they know exactly what content has to be created. They know what kind of story has to be created, and they've got the original assets. The key problem that they'd face if these games hadn't been made beforehand was Frostbite's designed for first-person shooters. How do we turn it into a third-person game? What's good for Motive is they're not working from square one. And again, it's a similar thing with Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine has a lot of example content for third-person shooters. It's got a lot of very, very good locomotion systems. So a great example is we use ALS, which is Advanced Locomotion System. It's very heavily modified, but that's our base. With Frostbite, there isn't really an open source plugin or marketplace network of assets you can buy because it's proprietary, exactly. But
It has its benefits and its drawbacks. Like, the support that they have internally for their own engine is great, but it also means that there's not necessarily a project out there that did something similar. Like, when they did Dragon Age Inquisition, they had to make an entire horse riding system from scratch because no one had done that. And that wouldn't happen to you with an open software like Unity or Unreal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can see your point, Anita. So, in my opinion, regarding the engines, I see the open source type more an advantage regarding to the private because you have the community on your side. So, for example, I don't know if you have any issues or if there are any bugs with the engine that doesn't work properly on some aspects, the community itself will do the job for you. And once they identify the problem and possibly even make a solution on how to fix it, the programmers and the engineers that developed on the engine can take that feedback and apply it to the next updates. But on the other hand, with the private engines, yeah, you do have it a little limited because the engineers and the programmers and our people that work on the engine needs to do more work in order to fix those issues and apply the changes.
I think a bigger problem potentially with proprietary engines, definitely from people that I've spoken to, is the fact that because they're proprietary, they've been maintained for many years in-house. An open source engine has a community, so the documentation is typically through the form of wikis or forums. A proprietary engine has no such thing because the source code is not publicly available. So you run into a problem where a guy programmed this feature 10 years ago and he's left the company now. He didn't comment what he made it for, and if you remove or change anything, it breaks everything. So you essentially have to reverse engineer key parts of your engine to figure out how they work, because between productions, as you know, with AAA companies, a lot of people change positions, move jobs, get promoted. So that programmer that programmed the core physics engine might no longer be at the company, and he might not have commented a key thing you need to build, say, the kinesis or the stasis system. So now you've got to have a team of programmers figure out how they built that. Whereas with something like Unreal, someone would have figured it out on GitHub because the code would be publicly accessible.
Nowadays,
yeah.
Nowadays, people actually place a really high value on that, and there's usually really good documentation. They make sure, but that is because they've experienced all of the hiccups from the past.
Yeah.
So if you have an engine that has been around for a very long time, the odds are much greater that will happen. And there's also the fact that we as external people don't know what revision Frostbite is on at the moment. If it's still the same engine that they did use for Anthem, if it's evolved so far that it's now a different version.
Yeah.
Like, is it 5? Is it version 6? Is it version 500? We won't know.
Or are they running it like Bethesda does with their creation kit, which is still based on code from 1999's Gamebryo engine? Like, it's still in there, the code, and if they remove it, it will break everything. Well, yeah, because I mean, my development experience started out with Fallout modding, and when you're modding part of Fallout 3, but you can find Oblivion code in it, or you're modding part of Fallout 4 and you can find Skyrim code in it, because they're all the same
again,
engine.
it just works.
Yeah, exactly. But the fact is that code in that engine is from 1999. So, I mean, that's over 20 years ago. So the guy who made that is no longer going to be there.
Yeah.
No, it was also a different company they licensed it from, so that's an additional.
Yeah, you're right. Gamebryo uses the Havoc physics engine, but it uses like the 2006 version of it. So, and you're right, licensed stuff gets even more complicated with middleware. So, I know Frostbite does most of its stuff internally, but for example, we use Fmod as our audio middleware engine, and obviously we're quite reliant on Fmod staying up to date because it's out of our control. We're not the developers of that tool. So imagine if I needed to remake a game that used Fmod 20 years from now, and Fmod is no longer around as a company. You basically have to start from scratch.
Yeah. And despite all the, I guess, the fame and infamy that the Frostbite engine gets, you have to admit, like, the amount of detail they can pack into the models and the environment is amazing. I'm loving the look of it so far.
Frostbite's visual fidelity, particularly its visual effects, as proven throughout the Battlefield franchise, are second to none.
Yes, I love Battlefield 1. I use that as one of my examples when listing potential ideas for if they were to have blood and grime gather up on Isaac's armor the more he progresses through a chapter. And my example for that was in Battlefield 1. If you bayonet someone, you get blood on your weapon sort of thing, and it stays there for quite a while unless it rains in the map, or if you're going prone through the mud in the trench, you track mud on your weapon and your and even to the point where you can see the mud on the buttons of your uniform.
Yeah, and the fact that it was like true first person as well. So when you look down, you had your body. I think the
Yeah.
only thing that Battlefield 1 suffered from was that it was the Great War, one of the most horrific wars of all time, where, shrapnel weaponry became into its first industrialized use, and you couldn't dismember anybody. Now, this is the horror developer speaking.
Yeah.
But, like, god damn it, some guy gets blown up by artillery and he's still in one piece. You're like, he should be everywhere.
Done
He
did
should
that
rag
well.
rolling across the
Oh my
map.
God.
He should actually be, like, damaged by that, yeah.
Yeah,
That's why I
painted
play
all over
Verdun
like
on the side.
Yeah, Verdun is again, it's kind of like Battlefield 1 if it was more of a mill sim.
Yeah. And just like Battlefield 1, where you said like Battlefield 1 suffers from that issue, Verdun suffers the issue of low player count, which is very unfortunate because I would really, it's always a shame when like I can only get bot matches and that. But yeah. It's a whole different story.
Without going off topic, one thing I wish Battlefield 1 really had was a proper trench warfare mode where you had one team in a trench and one team in a trench, and then they had to push sequentially over no man's land and capture the other trench, like proper.
Yeah, that was only like.
One.
You're right. Yeah, it's only present like one or two. You remember the operations mode where
Yeah.
what was it, Saint Quentin Scar? Yeah, you start in the trenches, but then you move out to the open fields.
Because
Like,
imagine
wish it was more like that.
Battlefield 2042 with its 128 player count. In a modern conflict, that's an absolute clusterfuck. But in World War One, that's like 100,000th of how many troops would have actually been on the field. Like,
Absolutely, yeah.
insane.
I mean, what I would really like a game to do again with massive multiplayer games being still so popular and there's being such a large player base for it now, especially around the world, with global servers becoming more and more common. So you're no longer necessarily separated by server region, right? Would be an event where you actually had people hold a line. There was a similar event for artists where there's an ongoing comic artist war. I forgot the name of the project, unfortunately, else I'll give it a shout out, but it's like a cinematic universe, but being made by different artists. Everyone can join, everyone can leave, but it's an ongoing conflict, and they have to draw art for it. And I would like to see something like that with trench warfare at some point in a World War One shooter.
Yeah,
The premise of that sounds cool. How like people can just join and leave whenever they please to like continue it. That's nice.
Fuck the metaverse. I want to relive the Great War in VR.
Oh god, true horror.
No, you don't. Depending on the graphics fidelity, you don't.
You give them Gallipoli PTSD.
Yeah. That was the
Respawn.
VR game that was like 100 gig or something.
Mate is a massive fan of Medal of Honor, so when he heard about the VR game coming out, he was so stoked. But the problem was he didn't have a VR set, so he'd have to get one.
Yeah, VR exclusivity deals, it always really irks me.
Oh, God, yeah, Half-Life Alyx, that really hurt me. Oh yeah.
My motive, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yep.
that was their first game. That was the first game that they made.
Isn't the guy that's the art director? Isn't the guy
they
that's
did
the
with
art
the
director
space maps.
for? Isn't the guy that's the art director for Dead Space Remake also the art director for Star Wars Squadron?
I believe he was, yeah.
I think he was. I would have to look it up, but
I mean,
Let's see.
Probably look. So Mike is the one. He's now working on the art director as Dead Space Remake and was before on Star Wars Squadrons. He also worked on Batman Arkham Origins. Yeah.
So
It's a very interesting mixture of games to work on, especially now with the combination with Dead Space as well.
The art director for Star Wars Squadrons, you guys were talking about that before. Hez Chorba, probably butchering that, worked on, let's see, the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Angry Birds Star Wars 2, and Connect Star Wars. Yeah, so pretty much Star Wars exclusive in terms of art directing. All the way back from back in 2012 up to 2020.
The art director for the current Dead Space remake was art director on Dead Space 2. And then he went on to do Arkham Origins and then eventually Star Wars Squadrons.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, he did all the genres.
So
and now he's
on
come full circle.
on the live stream, was that because I can't quite remember on the actual live stream we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Was it the assistant art director that
Yeah, it
was
was.
showcasing the stuff, not the actual? Yeah, I thought it was. I found that interesting that they got the assistant art director to do one of the breakdowns rather than the actual art director.
What are you talking about? Assistant art director?
So
Are they all?
So the guy talking on the live stream, who's breaking down the art, isn't the actual art director. He's the assistant art director. If you actually listen to how he introduces himself.
Wait, does he? Let's see.
It's either assistant or associate, one or the
Associate
other.
or assistant, yeah.
I
See,
don't
look, there's
remember.
proof we've watched it more than once.
But it's really nice
see.
to see them showcase talent that isn't just like the top 3 people, because usually you get to see one person as a spokesperson for a game, and that's your human contact for that game.
He said art director at the very start. So yeah, Philip called Mark. Yep. He called him art director, not assistant.
Is that at the start, right? Is that at the start of the showcase? Because if
Yeah,
you
the very
watch
start.
so if you actually skip forward to when they break down the suit, or they
suit.
showcase the necromorph, it's a different
Yeah.
guy. So they have the 3 talking heads are like the leads.
The
actual
person
people
doing the voiceover. Right. I got
yes. So the actual people
Now-
doing the showcase content are the associates, which is really nice to see them included, because what they could have done is pretended, it was just those 3 that was actually like
Right.
getting a chance to talk. But they
you.
actually
Yeah,
included
sorry.
everyone on the team.
Yeah, I must have like misheard you. What you meant by what point of the stream you're talking about?
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Yeah,
my
that
bad.
makes total.
Wasn't
No,
specific
that
enough.
makes total sense now that you're referring to the person on the voiceover.
I mean, we're
Yeah,
talking
all
about
good.
an hour worth of content. There's plenty of places to mishear stuff and misplace
Yeah.
stuff.
Apparently, like later in the stream, they mentioned that like when they were ending the last preview of the engine room, and I can't
Engine.
talk because it's morning. Yeah, thank you, my early morning brain. Yeah, the engine room walkthrough. After they finished showing off that, they said that'll be enough for today. We've still got a lot more to show, and I'm pretty sure at one specific point they mentioned that they've got like gameplay features that they don't want to show off too early, sort of thing. Which that reminded me what we were talking about earlier about like if you show off something too early to a community, like what they're doing now in terms of the art.
Well, a great example was when they actually showcased the combat for the first time, and they were very clear that these were placeholder animations, right? So they said, okay, this is purely the sound design. Bam, shoot the plasma cutter, and his arm kind of flies down, and everyone in the comments is like, "Oh, I hope they fix the animations by the time the game comes out." And I'm kind of sat here like, well, yeah,
the recoil, yeah.
I mean,
yeah, the recoil
it's
going
a
down.
placeholder animation. They literally said that.
Mm-hmm.
That always
and now it's all good.
fascinates me. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that always fascinates me when people are basically told the obvious, and then they say,
and they completely overlook it.
Yeah,
that happened a ton during the first stream. People were just saying, "Oh, this looks bad. Oh, why there's too much fog."
Here we are demonstrating our fog system. Oh, there's too much fog, guys.
I mean, in some of the earlier streams, you can clearly see that there are still blockout meshes in places, and people started immediately blasting. Graphics didn't look up to date, or the lighting was flat. And if you have context for that, which I admit they didn't do enough of in the first live streams, but they do a really good job of now, to put into context what they're showing.
Yeah.
Because if you know what to expect and what it is that you're looking at, you're not too tempted to criticize it.
Well, exactly.
They definitely.
I mean, well, given that it's coming out in January 2023, you'd certainly hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely. The 27th to 27th, yeah.
I was surprised they already announced like a concrete day as well, because usually they go early 2023 or something like that. So you must be quite confident.
If it were to me, I would have released it on February instead of January.
Well, I think it's always interesting when they
because of the anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the 10th anniversary of Dead Space 3.
Because
I used to make it more special.
The other release date I was thinking of is they do what the original Dead Space released on, which was Halloween.
Yeah, they'd have to.
Yeah.
They're definitely I wouldn't think they'd wind back the release date for the 2022 Halloween.
No.
I definitely think they would have to fast forward to the 2023 Halloween if they wanted to hit the same date they did for the first game.
Well, the thing is,
Or it is
nowadays
still early. Who knows? Maybe they. Oh, sorry. You go, Anita.
it's alright. The thing is, nowadays the release date before Christmas or the lead up to Christmas, that includes Halloween, is very chock full of AAA blockbuster games that are being released for the Christmas business, where like parents and aunts,
Get the games
uncles,
for the
and
kids. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, it's the
So
classic scenario.
everyone puts the big blockbuster games there. You don't want to necessarily always compete with them.
Yeah.
Especially as a game like Dead Space that is
Not everyone plays
not-
horror games.
A horror game is great, but it's not a blockbuster, so it's not an explosive experience that like screams in your face, please play me all the time.
It's
more
not
of
like a
quiet dude thing.
Yeah, it's not like a game that would grab more of the audience that wasn't already in tune with the series beforehand, sort of thing. Like
Well,
it's not like
classic
it's not a safe game, so to speak. It's not a safe game like how you see with games like Fortnite and shit and
Yeah.
COD. Like you see
I think the thing is though, it might not affect the game itself, but one thing you've got to bear in mind, right, is that games reviewers only have a limited amount of time, and they have to review games to get games out, and games live and die based off their promotional content, because you can make the best game in the world. If nobody knows about it, no one's going to play it. So a great example is look at Motive's live streams. The average engagement is probably around 100,000 to 200,000 viewers, right? So imagine you're a triple A studio, like Motive. You want to sell a lot of copies to warrant making this game, because I mean they're not an indie studio, right? So these people are all getting paid decent salaries. They're all working full time, so it's a lot of money that they've got to make back in sales. If the news media's headlines are all on these two big blockbuster games, and your game is pretty good, and it's a completely different genre, but it's not on the front page of IGN. And you've got to bear in mind that the vast majority of people that buy video games aren't the ones on Reddit, Discord, Facebook, or Twitter. They're the ones that look at games media on their YouTube recommended and go, that looks cool, I'm going to buy it. So if you get buried by those headlines, no one's going to know about your game and you're not going to sell as much copies as you want. It's the same reason why you should never release a game on Steam in between two massive sales. Because all the games in the sale get promoted and your new on Steam will just get buried.
Yep.
So it's always best to release in a time frame and in a month where you don't really have any competition, even if you're in a completely separate genre. Not because they're two separate genre games and it's a different audience, but because if your game releases in February when no other games have come out, the games media will always want to report on a new video game, and so they'll all report on you. And when people go new news or they go on their recommended, all of them will be making videos about just your game.
Yeah.
I think the most notorious example of this is the Kingdoms of Amalur thing. Like, Kingdoms of Amalur has become like a cult classic. Like, actually are interested in the RPG space and are informed about it. But it released the same month as Skyrim, and it was absolutely just buried underneath everyone talking about Skyrim. And no one even knew it existed until someone, like, some old reviewer grabbed it after they'd already gone bankrupt, basically.
God, that's depressing.
I mean, another good example would be Titanfall 2, in which, regarding the commercial aspect, EA was more invested to promote Battlefield 1 and leaving Titanfall 2 in a position a bit delicate.
And games, the saddest thing is you can make the coolest, best game ever. Whatever, you love it. It's brilliant. And a great example, you bring it up, Titanfall 2 is arguably one of the best first-person shooters ever made. Fight me.
It was really
Absolutely not. I will not fight you over that. That's pure fact.
Good. I like that. We're on an agreement here. But criminally undersold because they released it between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. And again, different note, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare would have sold incredibly if they didn't call it Call of Duty, because it was a fantastic campaign game, one of some of the best written characters.
Wasn't it Advanced Warfare?
No, it was Infinite Warfare, and that is exactly the problem, right? You go, was it Advanced Warfare, or was it Infinite Warfare, or was it
Advanced Warfare was with the controversial Kevin Spacey villain, and Infinite Warfare was the one with Game of Thrones.
Cool ass
villain.
robot. Yeah, the cool ass robot. And
which had
This is
more
the thing,
emotion than
right?
the other human
And
characters.
that was like a clash of, that was those two games. They were sorry, one sec. Like those two games, Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, they were like Clash of Titans right there. Those two, when like everyone went nuts with the Battlefield 1 trailer. That trailer was like just amazing marketing. And then the Infinite trailer dropped. Infinite Call of Duty Infinite trailer dropped, and there was just so much disappointment in it. And I'm pretty
This is the
sure
problem.
like Battlefield 1 video became one of the most liked gaming video on YouTube at the time. And then the Infinite Warfare one became the most disliked back when we had the dislike bar.
I was going to say, we can't even know if it's still the most disliked one on YouTube.
Yeah,
The game
and
itself
that's-
was
and that's-
good, but honestly, if it didn't have the Call of Duty name in the title, the game wouldn't have received this amount of backlash.
Exactly. And that's the
Yes,
exact problem,
yeah.
right? Imagine if they hadn't called it Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Imagine if
I
they just called it Infinite Warfare. It was a completely new IP. It wasn't related to the Call of Duty franchise. It didn't have a multiplayer component, but it had one of those really well-written single-player campaigns. And the single-player campaign was fantastic because you basically had a ship, you had a crew, you could go on different missions to fulfill different objectives. They developed that into its own IP. I guarantee it would have sold incredibly well.
And I mean, from a visual perspective, Infinite Warfare is still impressive.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah,
I
it
have
is.
looked
Yeah.
at the every time I boot that game up, I literally just stand around in like an aircraft carrier and just look at the textures for a while.
Mhm.
I mean, didn't we literally spend an entire night as a
Looking
as
at textures?
development
Yes.
team looking at textures in literally? So we dropped into Infinite Warfare, and all the characters are shouting at me, and I'm just shooting plant pots in like a space airport, going, "Oh, these destruction physics look cool. What if I shoot the signs? The sign crack, and then the screen glitches, and then I shoot the window, and I'm like, what if I shoot the window, and the whole thing just implodes, and I get sucked out the window and
Yeah.
get killed? I'm like, oh yeah. they thought
Every
of that
Now you
one
can
time-
too."
admire the textures of space.
Every time I see a game like that, I'm just really sad because people worked on that, poured their heart and blood into it, and they took the amount of time it takes to, in this case, not make horse balls shrink, but to make pots crack realistically and signs crack realistically, that most people are never going to actively notice. It just passively adds to the immersion, right?
Yeah.
And then no one plays it because it was marketed wrong or it had flaws in other areas.
Because it was sold as a Call of Duty game.
Yeah, it was a good game, but the thing is that with the whole futuristic aspect, the Call of Duty fans were just like already tired of it, so they wanted something different, something like Battlefield 1 did.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. When you run in an issue with games with sequels, where you basically wear, like you said, you wear the fans out. So you've done different studios have done futuristic things, and people really wanted to return to World War One, World War Two. So Battlefield 1 gives them exactly what they want, and Infinite Warfare just rubs it in their face that these guys are just doing what they don't want. But if they hadn't announced it as a Call of Duty game, but they announced it as a new IP, people would go, "Well, this is cool," because they like Titanfall too.
I mean, there's also the classic example of IP doesn't necessarily mean a game is good or will sell well with Metal Gear Survive. Because after Metal Gear Solid 5, fans were still salty about that not ever being finished. And without getting into whatever happened between Konami and Kojima, that was never going to be. So instead of creating a new IP that dealt with zombies, they went, okay, we made this entire engine, and we have these assets, so let's make another game in the same universe. And that was what kind of ruined it, because it was a decent, I played the beta for it, it was a decent game. If it hadn't been attached to Metal Gear, which is a franchise very dear to my heart, I probably would have been fine with it. But, because you're actively always reminded that it's a tie-in to something else.
Yeah, and without promoting negative atmosphere, there's a lot of Metal Gear Solid references in all of our trailers and within the game itself. We are.
That's
big
probably
fans of
because
that
half the
franchise.
development team loves that series.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Someone who definitely loved those.
in the 2019 trailer where the Stiltwalker kills Edwards, the classic one now where he goes, "Ah, fuck you." Yeah. At the end, she goes, "Edwards, which is obviously...
Oh my god, of course. Oh shit.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh
Yeah.
hell yeah.
I mean, to be fair, what better games are there to look at to design a stealth system than the Splinter Cell games and the Metal because they kind of perfect that kind of gameplay. If you're
Surveillance
doing a horror
camera.
game, and if you're doing a horror game that focuses on like evading enemies, at least for a good chunk of gameplay, it's nice to look at that and just go,
Maybe in the
how do people
sequel.
actually know what they're doing? Do that.
Maybe in the sequel, if the first one sells well, we'll get the David Hayter cameo.
Colonel.
I never asked for this. Oh wait, that's the wrong Stealth franchise.
Deus Ex. Never asked for this.
Oh yeah, big day.
Why
big
you
day
locked in the
of
bathroom?
too.
The memes that
Nanomachines,
consumed you,
son.
my cringe inhibitors. Doctor, turn off my pain inhibitors.
That reminds me, maybe next time someone injects themselves with nanite spray, we should just go nanomachines, son.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Oh my god.
I don't want to get sued by Konami.
On
They've probably
Sure.
copyrighted that phrase. It's
Sure.
Konami.
no, really? Like, really, it's that bad? Like referencing something in a game to in your game is like that. Like that's how bad it could be with them.
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, yeah,
Really?
unfortunately, I mean, classic example, and not to badmouth anybody, but you know, look at Nintendo. I made a Nintendo fan game. Well, say goodbye to your house, son.
The thing is, with Konami, it's usually a bit different and not as Nintendo. For example, there was a Metal Gear Solid remake on Unreal Engine 4 back then. It wasn't 5 yet. And instead of suing him, they offered him a job. So,
I mean, they offered him
They
a job, but
I mean, yeah, that was probably that or a lawsuit. But
we'd love for you to work to us. Also, please never work on this thing again, or we will sue you into the
yeah,
forest.
so
Actual threat.
yeah, I think the main point I'm always sad about is that they keep dragging their feet on the Metal Gear Solid movie. That's been in pre-production for so long now.
Wasn't there as well a Five Nights at Freddy's movie that was in making?
Pardon me?
Like, I don't know what happened with that project.
Oh,
That's the
that
thing.
that happened, but it was like it wasn't even called like Five Nights at Freddy's. It was like
Yeah,
it stars
Wonderland,
Nicolas
Nick
Cage.
Cage,
Nicolas
mate.
Cage's
Yeah,
in it,
right.
but he's like a mute. He doesn't talk.
Funny story.
and-
That was not made by the same people.
As Five Nights at Freddy's.
No,
Yeah,
it was made by. It was not a
Yeah,
FNAF movie.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like it's like not titled FNAF, but it's heavily
It's
based off
FNAF.
like the same premise, like animatronics coming to life, but instead someone actually does something about it and kills them.
It's
absolutely
legally
fantastic.
distinct. That's the
Legally
important part
distinct.
about it.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I watched it, and I was like, "This is." You know how most Nicolas Cage films are either absolutely terrible or the best things you've ever seen. There's absolutely no in between.
Or the
Um,
third thing, they're also good for meme potential,
Yeah,
whether
great
they're
for
good
meme
or bad.
potential. Yeah,
I mean,
and,
Face Off is a meme.
He's been part of different movies that are kind of weird, but
Yeah.
Jesus, how in the hell he gets all these roles? Like, who
Well-
sends them these roles?
So I watched this Willy's Wonderland, and honestly, it was beyond hilarious to just see these. You know, basically that I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me, Rorschach kind of moment with an
Nicolas Cage
animatronic.
going
Absolutely
Doomslayer.
fantastic.
Wait, that was from the Watchmen movie.
No,
No, yeah, I know, but yeah, I was making another comparison, like
okay.
the Doomslayer situation, Nicolas Cage,
Oh,
the animatronic Slayer.
I mean, there's also Mandy if we're talking Nicolas Cage horror movies.
Yep, there
Uh,
is.
We have gone like so off topic. It's amazing.
you don't say.
Well,
But
it's still,
don't worry.
kind of on topic because it's related to horror.
Yeah,
I mean, I did warn you.
but it's fine. Like honestly, it's great. I love having conversations where we just go so off topic and we literally just forget. Like, wait, what the fuck we're talking about? What
Yeah,
art
well-
development?
You're the host, so it's your job to guide us back.
I'm sorry. I'll be a better host next time.
we're just here to rampage.
Sorry, someone's holding a plasma cutter to my head like last night, saying, "Brody, you're gonna fucking host tonight. This morning, you're gonna love it." Evil laugh. I was actually just noticing with the YouTube video of the art live stream, they you know how they got the whole chapters thing on YouTube now, where it like splits the bar along the length of the video into like segments.
Yeah.
And it shows like most viewed of the clips. Well, they've actually like customized one of the chapters to have like a star emoji saying most played, and it was the one where they're showing off the models for the locker between the original and the remake, the flamethrower and the ripper, etc.
Mhm.
And I can't wait to see some of the tools.
I think we were actually talking about this internally, that the way they've reimagined such limited, like the craziest thing to me is I played Dead Space I play Dead Space all the time, and it still holds up in my eyes. Like, it still looks absolutely fantastic, and then you look deeply at the models and you go, oh my god, this is like just a disc. There's no detail to it. And then you look at the original comparison models to the ones now, and you're like, how the hell did I not see that that's basically just a few cubes put together, kind of squished, and the textures are all blurry? Because in the actual game, it looks so real, and you're so immersed. And it goes to show how effective art direction, I'm not speaking for you, Anita, but how effective art direction and a cohesive style can make something age so incredibly well.
It's fine, I wrote an entire thesis about this.
Exactly. There you go. Come on.
Also coming from like a, since we're all players of since we've all played the game. Wait, have you, Anita?
No, I actually never played them, the original.
Oh,
mostly
shit.
because
Oh my god.
So when I was younger, my parents were quite restrictive of what kind of games I could play, and I never had the nostalgia to go back to it. And it's really hard to go back to games that old if you don't have nostalgia for them.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's understandable.
I have watched all of them as walkthroughs because obviously I'm working on a game that's heavily inspired by, but I have never actually played them. So I'm actually looking forward to a remake because I might be able to play it without going why are these controls so clunky?
Oh yeah, the clunkiness. Yeah, we can relate to that. The one thing I was going to touch on with what you said earlier, Calvin, about noticing models, when you actually go up to them and look at them, you're like, oh my god, this is just a disc, or this is just a block for a book. When I thought of that, from a player viewpoint, you're also heavily, unless you're it's on your repeat playthrough, your 10th playthrough or something, and you're playing for the first time, all your attention's being drawn to actually trying to survive the what's to come sort of thing. You're focusing on necromorphs, you're focusing on what that noise was, and that's why you don't pay attention to those shoddy looking models, and also the lighting, because lighting plays a big part in making something making the textures look good. And that's how a lot of the old games could get away with having such low detailed models.
Yeah, I always like the ethos that I have is you can have fantastic models and shit lighting and it'll look shit. You can have shit models and fantastic lighting and it'll look good.
Yeah, and I mean the original Dead Space did that. They specifically choose forward rendering so we could have better lighting, and it makes the game age so much better than so many other games of the time. Because the mood is still there. So many older games don't have good lighting, but the textures are kind of crisp, and it to us looks unnatural now going back that we're used to better lighting. But if a game has decent lighting and shitty textures, you can live with it.
Yeah. Well, it goes down to the kind of the age-old thing, right? So, to expand on what Anita said, forward rendering. Have you ever wondered why in Dead Space there's no windows without stuff behind it? Have you ever wondered why stuff in Dead Space isn't actually properly reflective? It's all kind of flat. Well, it's because forward rendering. It's because forward rendering doesn't have support for those kind of things. Forward rendering is actually what VR uses. Dead Space decided to use it because they had to build their engine based off, it was, from what I heard, an early version of Unreal. The same one they actually used for their golf games. Funnily enough. And basically what they did is they went with forward rendering because calculating lighting, actual real-time shadows, without having to factor in reflections or reflectivity, so that's metalness or roughness, is significantly cheaper.
Yeah,
which is why
we could still choose that today in modern Unreal Engine for specific shaders only, which is really great to use sometimes.
Great example is Edward's Visor. That's using forward rendering, so it's a cheaper way of faking what glass looks like rather than actually simulating accurate reflections on the glass. So Dead Space didn't use ray tracing, but it did use a kind of very early rudimentary equivalent. And that's exactly why in Dead Space every shadow is dynamic. You never notice in old games that when your character moves through an area, he doesn't cast shadows. You kind of just look like you're floating. Great example, Fallout 3 or Skyrim. You're not grounded in the world. You kind of look like you're floating over it. Well, that's because the lighting is baked, or at the very least, it's not casting shadows from the player character. With Dead Space, every light source is physically simulated. So what they're doing in the remake, they actually did in the original. The difference is that with the remake, they're now using real-time ray trace lighting, so they can factor in things like reflectiveness, roughness, and metallicness, so stuff looks a lot more photorealistic. In the original Dead Space, that's why the suit kind of looks like this odd copper. It's not actually reflecting anything in the environment, it's all fake. But what it means is that the lighting has aged so well, because lighting in Dead Space is still the exact same method of lighting we use today. It will never change, because it was physically accurate when it was made. So you get these pin-sharp, crisp shadows. You get this, lights cast, depending on where they are, casting longer shadows or shorter shadows. You get very accurate darkness. It does it so well at its time that it basically hasn't been beaten, because it was one of the best implementations of forward rendering dynamic lighting in a video game.
Yeah, and it also has a lot of drawbacks that only really could be taken into account for a horror game, because Dead Space is a very dark game because it is a horror game, and it's a very dark game because of power out, similar things like that. And it works in that environment, but other games that are working with brighter environments, with more vibrant environments in terms of color, would not have been able to use that technique. So I, as an art director, look at that and see it as a deliberate design choice to basically make the lighting a character as well, and put priority on that.
Exactly. I mean, a great example is, look at something rusty. Is it shiny or is it rough? I mean, Brody, if you look at a piece of rusted metal, is it shiny and reflective like a mirror, or is it rough like cardboard?
You're talking IRL, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks rough.
So why do you think everything in Dead Space is rusty and brown?
Because why do I think it looks rusty? Because
why do you think they decided to make it look rusty and brown?
Well, aside from the fact that, like, I guess because it's a the ship because it's set on the Ishimura, and the Ishimura is the first ever planet cracker to date, so it's a very dated
of course,
dated ship. Yeah.
Before they wrote the lore for that, they would have figured out their color palette. Why do you think they did that? And why do you think Doom 3 used a similar color palette? Because this is a really interesting question from someone who's asking someone who isn't a game developer.
Doom 3.
So
because it was very popular?
Well, no. It's because they don't have to deal with reflectivity.
Yeah, forward rendering doesn't like reflections. So
if everything's rough and rusted, you don't have to worry about it, because the player won't be drawn out by the fact that this mirror isn't reflective, or this metal beam that should be shiny isn't shiny, because the engine can't physically handle it. So they designed the entire ship to look old and worn and damaged and caked in dust and mud, because dust and mud and damage and stripped paint isn't reflective. It's flat. So it ages incredibly well, because if I was lighting that same scene today, I would light it the same way, and it would look the same way, because the values haven't changed. The difference is now, it's with the Dead Space remake, as you've seen, they've upped the density. So it's still rough and damaged and worn, but there's a lot more metal accents. You can see the bolts in the walls. You can see repainted panels, because they can do that now.
I will say, back then, that was a choice because of technical limitation. It was actually helpful. With the remake, it's a difficulty, because once you go higher in density, when something is rusted over, if you look at a clean metal, right, the surface is quite uniform, but you get reflections of it. If something's rusted over, you get suddenly a lot of surface details, very noisy, it's very, it's not a calm surface anymore. Something your eye gets fixated on it now, just tries to figure out what this is and tries to find patterns in it. And that's an issue when you try and get it to be more detailed. It's the only thing that I've seen so far in the remake that they seem to be struggling a bit with, because it's really hard to do, to balance all the detail that you're bringing in with an art style that's already quite reliant on surfaces that have a lot of surface detail, because you're trying to find areas for the eyes to rest, and it's really hard to do that while keeping that aesthetic. It's one thing that we've also seen with the weapons, where, as we said before, they are creating detail out of nothing, and it's really hard to get the amount of detail right.
So a great example would be if you're looking at a car, right? A car is typically made of very smooth surfaces. It's made of panels that are smooth and they curve, right? Think about a typical car. So when you're designing that car, you wouldn't then think, let's add 6 bolts, cut it up, divide it into lots of planes, make stuff stack above it, make stuff lower below it, and make it all uneven and smooth. And not smooth anymore, because the whole point of that is it's a single metal piece that's being formed. So what Anita's saying is if you're making a weapon, it might not necessarily need all these indents and cuts and vents and holes and dents in it, because if you're going to design it in real life, it'd be a completely flat bit of metal. It'd be a solid block of metal. And the original plasma cutter, because of the technical limitations, they couldn't add that detail, so it was very unique to the aesthetic. You know, the original plasma cutter looks almost like a pneumatic drill. You know, that kind of thing. It's very blocky. It's very aggressive looking. But if you over detail it and you make it have all these tiny little details, you run the risk of making it look flimsy.
Yeah,
because stuff that's over detailed looks flimsy.
There's something in art called the 70-30 rule. Sometimes people also say the 80-20 rule, which is you want very, very detailed areas that draw the attention of a person looking at your piece of art or your game or your movie, and you want areas to rest where there's not a lot of detail. If you look, for example, at the suits in Dead Space, there's always like the undersuit, which is quite calm. There's not a lot of detail going on. Then there's the rig over top of it, which draws your attention with the HUD, with the helmet, with the indents, and that is a good balance to strike. And bringing that from the old game to the new game is really hard because you're adding a lot more detail as part of the making it look like a current gen game process, right? So a bar that was just literally a block before is now actually a round rod with screws and different materials applied to it, and it possibly even has different grooves and scratches and all of this kind of surface detail, which is normal for modern games, but wasn't necessarily intended back then. So balancing that is quite hard.
A great example, actually, is if you've ever played a recent first-person shooter, you may feel that you struggle to see people because they blend into the environment.
Yeah.
Why do you think
do
that
get
is the
that
case?
sometimes.
Why do you think that is the case?
No clue, to be fair.
Well, my answer to that is because the player characters are so detailed and the environments are so detailed that the human eye has absolutely no place to rest. And they don't stick out because the lighting's so realistic. So the problem you face when you take a game that worked really well because the character stood out because it had very specific amounts of detail and the environment was less detailed than the character, so your eye was always drawn to the character, is that when everything is photorealistic, camouflage works exactly like camouflage should, and it's the exact reason why camouflage exists. Because your eye cannot focus on something that's deliberately broken up with loads of deliberate lines. Why do you think camouflage exists? So if you look at digital camouflage, you can blend into a city really well because buildings are made of blocks and digital camouflage is lots of little blocks and it's grey, so you blend into greys. Well, it's the same thing because if you look at Isaac's suit as an example and then you imagine digital camouflage is lots of different blocks and layers that are irregular, well, that's just adding more detail to an original model. So now you're playing this third-person game and your eyes have absolutely no idea where to rest because the necromorphs are so detailed and the models are so detailed that they blend into each other, and the detailing on the back and the detailing on the suit is so detailed that the heads-up display and the rig no longer stands out. So you really struggle to read the situation.
Yeah,
and that's a problem you face.
That's a really big challenge, and that's why I'm glad to see, like from the earlier live streams to now, that they're kind of doing a really good job at that. Except for like a few areas where it was like there was one weapon where there was a bunch of a very, very dense amount of cables everywhere that was kind of hard to read, for example. But apart from that, they're doing a really good job of bringing that into a modern generation, which I find is very impressive. Because it was never meant for that.
It's funny because I can tell with us giving all this like game dev insight, we've kind of blown your mind because you're like, whoa, I've never thought about this before.
Yeah, you got me thinking a lot more, definitely.
And
yeah.
Open up a third eye.
I mean, that's fine.
So we've talked about we've talked about the industrial. Oh, sorry, wait, were you going to say something, Nita?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
making games changes the way you play games as well, which is one thing that's always a bit sad because when I play a game now, you know how we said
break it
before,
down?
that as well, but like, you know how you said before, you don't notice these things until you stand directly in front of the object because
Yeah.
you're occupied with the experience. And it's something that becomes very hard because eventually you just see the technical stuff a lot more.
It's really sad. It's
I
ruined
think a
games
good
for me.
example was of us playing GTFO lately, and I think the people that had to play with us kind of went insane, didn't they, Calvin?
Yeah, because I mean, like every time we were playing it, we were like, okay, no, this is great, but how did they do this? But why did they do
Or you
this?
find the tiniest error in a texture and you just go, why is this slightly misaligned?
Yeah, and then you
Meanwhile, the
think
people you're playing with are like, we gotta get the fuck out of here.
exactly. And you're like, yeah, but my shotgun makes a cool sound when I fire it at the wall compared to the floor. Shoot the enemies!
I can only imagine what those players might have felt while you two were mesmerized by the details.
See,
It's a
wouldn't say
different
you lose
kind of
passion.
fascination you get, but it's harder
Yeah.
to just lose yourself in a game, I would
It's
say.
more difficult to be immersed because I mean, here's a good example, right? So the first time you experience something, it's all completely brand new to you. You know, imagine you get a new car and it's this, it's super fast, it's really fancy inside. You're like, this is brilliant, but once you've driven it, you know, 4 or 5 times. No, don't crash it. Once you've driven it maybe 400 or 500 times, it's just the car you use to commute to work. And then once it breaks down and you have to pull the engine apart and fix it, eventually you start to hate the thing because you understand why it works and also you understand why it breaks so often. Yeah, that's our perspective.
I think
Yeah,
you appreciate the art and the work that goes into it a lot more than the average consumer because you know what goes into it.
Yeah.
But you also see a lot of your own problems with your own games reflected in other people's games that still have these problems. You see a lot of the stuff that you really like then want to draw inspiration from it. So you're always kind of analyzing a game in the background, so you're no longer losing yourself completely in the experience.
Yeah, it's not like you're losing a passion to play games. Quite the contrary, you gain a lot of you gain a lot of what is it? You see a lot of things from games, and you think you can apply that to your own thing or work upon it, or you start to think, oh hey, they did this thing, that's cool, or that could have done more. That could have done with some more work. I think it's cool to have that perspective.
It is always a bit bittersweet though, because you have these memories of being younger and just being completely only fascinated and lost in it, and just going, wait, it's already 4 a.m. I've been playing this game for ages.
The ignorance is bliss kind of vibe.
Yeah.
I think crazily enough, some of the most immersive games that I've ever played. I still have to say one of the most immersive games I've ever played is Fallout 3, despite the fact that it's aged so well. And this is good. This is so poorly. I mean, it's very outdated looking now. But
Yeah.
one thing that it did so well was it nailed the feeling of being in a post-apocalyptic world. Everything felt
It
dead
did.
and dying. And the sound design was a very critical part to that because I wanted to obviously link back to the Dead Space Remake live streams here. Audio complements visuals incredibly well, but you can also run into the same issue that we were describing, where if you overcomplicate the visuals, you can also overcomplicate the sound. Like a great example was they showcased the plasma color sound, right? And then they showcased all the different layers, and the feedback was, well, I like the original one better.
The sound design of the plasma cutter was what caused most of the criticism regarding the audio stream, so...
Yeah, that was
It's
pretty
always a
much
sad feedback you
the
don't
main
want.
yeah, that was pretty much what the primary or what the majority of people said. Yeah, the original sounded better. / they should add more oomph
And that's
to
the
the remake
problem you
one.
face, because you've got someone who didn't work on the original game reinterpreting these sounds, and they want to add their own spin on it, and rightfully so. Problem is it's like we were saying how we look at a game, Dead Space, for example, and we go, oh wow, this still looks just as good as when I played it. Well, you're going to think, damn, this sounds just as good as when I played it, because when it came out, it was an audio goddamn masterpiece, and it still is. The problem is you've got this nostalgic view of the plasma cutter because it is one of the most satisfying weapon sounds ever made.
So in your head, it
Arguably.
sounds better like it actually does, despite
Yeah.
actually sounding really good. But it's like old games look better in your head than they actually do.
So
Yeah,
yeah. So the
We've
problem problem that they may well face, and the problem that I think they may well encounter, is that you cannot please everybody. But you still, this is a remake. It's not a remaster. So rightfully so, they should change the sounds and change the sound design and change how the things are done. But you have to respect the original sound, and they've definitely tried to do that. And I think they've definitely done that with the revisions that they've done. The problem is if you post every audio sound and you ask for feedback, you're gonna get feedback, and everybody's gonna be split on it. So you're never really gonna be able to come up with a cohesive kind of audio structure.
Yeah, you can't please everyone.
No, exactly.
Yeah, I think I think in terms of passion, Dead Space fans are a bit like the Star Wars fans, where you have people that are so immersed in it and have been for so long that they kind of already know the IP even better than you do as someone that works at it. And they will always be dissatisfied because they have their own preferences. Like someone will go, I like the plasma cutter sound best from, I don't know, Dead Space 3, and I like the one that's from Dead Space 1 best, and they will fight over it, kind of like the prequels and the sequels. And you will, even if you exactly replicate the same sound and rip it, someone would complain.
Yeah, I think the issue that they were faced to is that they cannot use the original sounds as is, because obviously they were recorded and encoded for the Xbox 360. So they were encoded in such a frequency where if they no longer have the original source files, those audio sounds files will be at like DVD quality. But nowadays you've got 7.1 surround sound systems. You've got high fidelity HD audio. So they're going to sound compressed. What you really want to do is you want to, like, for example, we use Fmods, which allows us to do dynamic audio. Like some audio is calculated in real time with real-time filters, reverb depending on the size of the corridor, that kind of stuff. You can't process that and just import it as a sound. You have to have the engine support it. So sounds have to be built differently now because, like they said, they're built in layers. Because those layers will reverberate differently depending on where you are, depending on, how much ammunition is left in the weapon. It's a lot more like you're programming a sound rather than, say, designing and recording a sound as if it was in real life. So obviously it's going to sound different. Now I think what they've done is a fantastic reimagining of it. But the problem that some people need to accept is that this is a reimagining. It's not going to be Dead Space 1 again, exactly, because it never set out to be that.
Yeah, they want to expand upon it, make some new things. We touched a bit on we touched a lot about sound design in the previous podcast because we had Ghosty on board, and he's doing a course at university, wasn't he, Helios, in audio design, was it?
I believe he was. I mean, we could ask him anytime to see exactly what he said during the previous episode.
Yeah, so we talked a fair bit about audio, but back to art design and such. We've already talked about in the industrial settings. We're talking about Rust, and we're talking about the setting of the Ishimura. But we haven't talked anything about the organic textures, i.e., the slasher model and such. What's everyone's take on that? I mean, I love the detail they've done so far with the tendons ripping off the ear. I'm going to post an image in the podcast business chat that you can see for a reference. But
don't forget the fat.
Yeah, and the fat just coming off the cheeks and shit. It's so intense. And the armpits, even the armpits were the skin was tearing from. They've definitely gone for their own unique. Compare it to the original slasher naked model. They've got so much more. There's definitely more gore.
I really like what they've done with the gore. I think that there's a very fine line, though, that they need to be aware of, which is the original slashers, you could tell they were still human. And it's the humanity that made it so horrific. You could tell that these were people they weren't monsters, they weren't aliens, they were originally people, and there's remnants of those people still behind. You could sympathize with them and empathize with them on a human level,
way
which
they
is
could
what
do
made
that.
it so creepy.
One good way they did sorry, I was just a little quick addition to that. One thing they could actually do to enhance that is what they did a lot in Dead Space 2 is applying uniforms to said slasher models depending on the setting. So if you went when you started in the hospital, you saw patient and doctor, like in scrub uniforms, but then you went to
Well,
the EarthGov sec and you
there's an
saw security.
there's an interesting thing that I'm not sure if was present in previous Dead Space games, but I think should be present in this one is if you want to show a crew of variety, then the Necromorph should have skin tone variation as well.
They did mention that in the stream actually, that the model they were basing off in terms of skin color, since the setting of Dead Space is in 2508, the humanity has definitely like mixed a lot in terms of like different ethnicities and such. So they want to with other models they want to develop more of a united like a more mixing of more of skin colors for certain slashes that they plan on working on in the future. The model they were showing here that is pretty much the base they've been using
Yeah,
since
exactly. So
the very first stream.
I will
So
say
yeah,
it would be really nice if you could literally just fade a skin tone. Unfortunately, humans are different. So if someone has African roots, for example, their skull is going to have a same as someone has Asian roots. So you kind of have to work with blend shapes, a different way of deforming a mesh.
Yeah,
as well.
like it
to
won't
get
just
that right.
yeah, it won't just be like skin that they'd have to worry about. Basically, it's like other features and such. Yeah,
And that's just the slasher design. Imagine the rest of the Necromorphs, how it will be.
Yeah,
yeah,
think,
like
I wonder how the Leaper will look.
leapers.
I
Yeah,
think
who
one
knows
thing that
how much detail we're going to go
they
into
do need
that.
to be careful with gore, and we found this ourselves too, is if you over gore things or you try and add too much detail to gore, it can
It's
almost
no
look
longer
cartoony.
shocking.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
looks less shocking and it looks more comical. And this also comes down very much so to the animation, right? You could have the creepiest looking model ever, but if it doesn't move in a realistic manner, and the original, and obviously we haven't really seen the animations of them yet. We've only seen a few idle animations, but the original Twitchers and Slashers, they moved in such an uncanny way. You know, it was wrong the way
Twitching
they
the
moved.
leg, like when they
It
were
wasn't
standing idly.
exactly, and you need to absolutely. The thing they did with those animations, they absolutely nailed the feeling that this necromorph is like almost like a puppet possessed. It's not. It's not a person. It's not a zombie. It's something completely different. And recapturing that is going to be difficult too, because obviously they've got to remake a lot of the animations from scratch, because these are all new models. You can't just copy animations from an old model to a new one.
Yeah.
They're going to be reimagined too, so it's critical that they capture that same feeling.
They're also
I
going
think-
to have far more complex rigs this time around because there's a lot
Exactly.
more. Yeah.
I remember back when like I was watching the interview with like Glenn, they mentioned the whole like he originally wanted to, when dismembering necromorphs, you could shoot the hand and the hand comes off, not the whole arm. But obviously at the time, you know, with the system, they couldn't do that level of dismemberment where you chop off the foot and only the foot comes off. But no, instead you shoot the foot in Dead Space and the whole leg comes off. But they're actually doing that now with the remake, where if you shoot a slasher's blade off, the blade will come off, but the hand will still be intact. And yeah, with the with what Calvin mentioned before about, you know, not overdoing gore, when I look at this slasher, when I first saw it, I thought it looked pretty acceptable in terms of the levels of gore to retain that, you know, previously human appearance. The one thing though that I kind of was like, about was the spine coming out of the back. Like you can see the spine is now jutting out of the skin sort of thing. And I don't know, that's just probably me. Like I've seen a lot of like monster and like alien designs where like you can see the spine of something like of a creature coming out of their back. Or maybe some sort of mutation. I don't know. I'm just getting kind of sick of it. But
I think
So-
the point is this doesn't have a biological or gameplay use case. So if it was mutated for purpose, I would be really on board with it. I think the most impressive
yeah, but they won't like.
texture-wise on this show is the blood, because blood is really hard to get to look right, and the bones, because like it's a really good bone shader. Even though I don't agree with the spine having to be outside the body, it's a really nice shader on it.
Yeah,
I think what works really well about this too is the way that they've kept the neck structure together, but they've obviously modeled the internal organs. So you can see like the throat pipe, the esophagus, kind of hanging out, and you can see the skin is hanging like it's been shredded. This whole bottom of his like mouth has been removed from the. I love that he's got perfectly clean teeth though. Brushes
Yeah,
his teeth well.
I was going to mention that as well. Great.
I think
9 out of 10 dentists.
one thing that I definitely see with this model too is I really like the way that they've done the stretch mark kind of look on the skin, where it's kind of clearly almost looks like it's being burned or stripped away, and it's like
Been
peeled off in
torn,
strips.
yeah.
Yeah. But one thing that, interestingly enough, that I've recognized in the shader, you know how they did the shader where it removed the skin and exposed like the bone and the muscle underneath?
Yeah.
One thing you need to bear in mind is if you remove that muscle, even though the limb isn't amputated, how the hell are you going to move your arm?
Yeah,
If it's
true.
just down to the bone, how are you going to move
can't.
your arm? If you
Cannot.
yeah, exactly. If you remove your entire collarbone's muscle and just shred that, well, everything else is just going to go limp. Does their system account for that? Because if it doesn't, the problem you might face is you might feel like it's more like Doom Eternal, where you're just literally stripping them down like a fucking onion, and it's not actually having any real gameplay effect unless you physically remove the limb. Because imagine if you had, for example, the Ripper, right? And they went to
Yeah.
such an extent where you actually slice the individual tendons of the necromorph to make the arms go
Ugh.
limp without amputating
Stupid.
it.
So, I never noticed this before when looking at this screenshot. Slightly off topic, but if you look at the last thing I've posted in the chat,
Yeah.
Calvin, do you see the cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that in the original screenshot, or is that in the one that you posted?
Uh,
What do you mean?
no, it's in the original because they're using Substance Painter, so they're actually.
Yeah, I think so. It
Yeah.
looks very much like the viewport renders.
It's a game dev reference. This is the same software we use to texture our characters. So we're just basically saying, oh yeah, they've actually just captured it
Yeah.
straight from the viewport.
It's industry standard, and this is what it would look like. Probably not while you're painting, because if you're painting at this resolution, your PC would probably eventually give out on you.
Yeah, it explodes.
Blow
You
up.
would be painting one part at a time.
Yeah.
But this is basically what you see while you're working on it. So it's really
Yeah.
great, because when they were making the original Dead Space, that wasn't really possible.
Yeah,
It was a pretty revolutionary piece of software when it came out, and it's become the industry standard, I would say. There's only a handful of tools that can do this well enough.
the other
Helios.
interesting thing for for their characters as well is with the necromorphs, you had to dismember them to kill them, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, technically you can't kill them because they're still alive in some way, so you can only immobilize them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that in the law, yeah.
So now that they've got organs inside them, which they didn't originally because you couldn't dismember the torso, you could only cut the legs and arms and the head off.
Yep.
How's that going to affect gameplay?
It won't affect that much. The organs are just simply additional tissue for the necromorphs.
So how are they moving without their heart, lungs, or whatever? Because they do bleed when you kill them.
Well, it's mostly that corruption fluid that's inside them that makes them act.
Exactly. I mean, these are good
the-
questions for Roanoke.
They don't really bleed. It's just the blood left over from where the limb where you cut off. But what does come out of the limb are tendrils, like necromorph tendrils.
Mhm.
Because what Helios was going to say, law wise, you can't really kill necromorphs. You just
Yeah,
dismember
yeah.
them to the point where they are deemed
Ineffective,
incapacitated. Yeah. So they basically die in their own way, so the biomass can retake their dead body and use that to make another necromorph.
So that's what the sticky floor stuff is.
Yeah. Oh, what you said before, Helios, about the spine? You said in the original it jutted out, but
Yeah, it's pokes out. It doesn't rip the skin. It just reveals itself under.
And
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, it poke. It's not piercing the skin to show itself, but you can see it you can definitely see it under the skin more so. Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're kind of saying, right? Now that it's exaggerated from its original effect, it could almost look cartoonish. It looks overdone. You're pulled out of the fact that this is a comprehensive mutated creature. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what you hope that they don't do with the other creatures. They do exactly what they did with the front of this, because I mean the spilled out organs, the tiny hands, the face. It's absolutely exceptional texture and model work, and the detail is incredible. The problem is if you take the original concept and you over-interpret it, you run the risk of basically losing that iconic shape, figure, look. Exactly.
I love what
Yes.
they've done. Little mini hands. The mini hands are like made out of the intestines now, which you never saw in the original. They just like in the original game, they looked like very alien appendages, but now these miniature arms near the torso, near the belly, actually are consisting of the intestines, and you can see that now, which I love.
In the original and the movies, those limbs look
Yeah.
like little
Well,
hands,
I think-
probably for, I don't know, holding possible victims in order to finish them easier. Just like that security guy from the Downfall animated movie, in which that slasher was holding his head and was ready to execute him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but even
yeah,
then, like the
exactly.
hands themselves didn't look like the intestines. Like I was mainly talking about the look of the little
Well,
belly.
the way I always
hand.
saw it with the original slasher, I always thought the little hands were the original arms, and then the slash arms are like new grown bits from the mutation, because they were the
Yeah.
most like human looking withered arms. But now it makes sense. And again, this is an exact reinterpretation of it, because the original concept might not have specified that, but the artist went, well, it makes sense. This is in the stomach or the chest or whatever, the intestine area. Let's make them out of intestines. You know, we'll figure out how that works with biology later. But it looks cool. It is really interesting looking at this picture that you guys posted that they have actually modeled the musculoskeletal system. So I do think that if they are developing a system where you can strip these things away, they probably will have thought about that. And it might have been omitted for a gameplay perspective, but I do think there's some really cool options of innovating on the dismemberment gameplay. If you can slash and slice tendons and cripple limbs without actually removing them, because that would make, for example, the pulse rifle a significantly better weapon, because you could now pinpoint fire into a muscle group and completely cripple a necromorph. Because again, like you say, if the biomass stops using it when it's ineffective, well, you can make someone ineffective by removing their legs or by slicing the tendons between their knees.
Yeah,
Because you're not running with no tendons between your knees.
Because the pulse rifle in sorry, I was just gonna mention that the pulse rifle itself in the description was that the rounds are meant to like liquefy organs like upon contact. So and they were designed in a way, the projectiles, to like not cause a hull rupture in a ship if they were fired, sort of thing. So that's why the pulse rifle is primarily intended to fire against organic targets. So that's
Exactly.
I'd love to see something like that. And also, if they were to, like, it's a long shot because we haven't seen anything like it. But it'd be really cool if there was a option to like chop a necromorph horizontally in half at the torso, like using a line gun or something, or a ripper, and you can chop it up from the like at the torso height, and it crawls at you with its torso and its two arms that still remain, sort of thing, without its
Yeah.
legs.
Well,
Well,
I
it's
always
definitely possible we'll see something like that, but the thing that you always have to keep in mind is the more of these systems you layer on top of each other, the more performance intensive it gets. So
Yeah.
they will be basically loading multiple levels of the same characters by having the intestines visible, stuff like that. So the more you injure a necromorph, the more intense it becomes for your PC to render that one. And if you then add another system, for example, with virtualized geometry, to be able to cut them at any point, on top of that, you might run into issues where most PCs and consoles won't cope with that load anymore.
Another great example that we actually said was, we mentioned, okay, what if you slice the tendons, or what if you could, what if the pulse rifle was a more effective, weapon? But I've just proven my point that I said. By adding a new system, we've completely changed how the core gameplay loop of Dead Space works.
Yeah, about dismemberment being the key to kill
Exactly.
necromorphs. Yeah.
So by doing that, to make it, quote, more realistic, would that absolutely cripple the gameplay experience that makes it so enjoyable to play? And that's the exact kind of problems Motive will be facing.
When I was even noticing the pulse rifle in work in the very first dev stream, they were using the pulse rifle as a test weapon to show off the level of gore they could reveal on a necromorph by taking off its skin. And like the pulse rifle was when shooting, they were deliberately not dismembering the necromorph. They were shooting only pieces of skin that's still on it, so they could show like what a necromorph almost looks like as just muscle and skeleton, and it was freaky to see. But like it looks like they're trying to make it so the pulse rifle doesn't do that, where they're like the pulse rifle can, you still have to prioritize taking it at a limb, than just shooting anywhere and hoping for the best sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like yeah, they were shot at like the jaw of a necromorph and like the whole throat. You see the esophagus on one of the pictures I sent. That'll be gone. And yeah, you shoot the top of the head, you can see like no eyeballs and just like the top of the skull showing.
Which will be incredibly creepy, yeah.
What I will
Yeah.
say, in the way we've seen them split up the gore meshes, it seems like partially dismembering a foot, partially dismembering a hand is planned, but if you shoot, for example, the lower arm, it will just come up completely.
Yeah, just limp. Yeah, I mean, there's a good example, right? We're looking at the bad slasher clip. If you strip all the muscle away to the bone, how would the bone even stay attached to the body?
Probably muscle and tendons.
But if you've removed all of that, like in this case, this skull is completely stripped away.
Yeah, like it would just be the spine holding the skull, but even then, wouldn't the skull just be like flopping about like
Well, yeah,
near
I
the
mean,
neck?
the only thing holding the neck and the spine together is the spinal
I
fluid
guess-
in between your vertebrae.
I guess they intend to like keep a bare minimum amount of muscle that you can't like
Exactly,
take
but then
off.
there's
to-
the question you run, isn't it? Because all of a sudden now you have to break immersion to keep a system functioning.
Well,
A
if we're
system
talking
that
about the
wasn't
head,
present in the original game.
or like I guess we're talking about the skull and such. If you take out the like the front of the neck sort of thing, and you're left with like the back of the neck that's still visibly damaged, I guess the next shot you take will not it won't just leave the spine and skull there so it's flopping about, but it'll actually like dismember the spine.
Yeah,
Like detach, so it would literally behead the necromorph, so the head would like topple off, sort of thing.
you'd certainly hope so.
The
Yeah.
main limiting
Yeah.
factor for Dead Space Remake, Dead Space isn't supernatural, so you have to explain what you're doing. If this was
Yeah.
something that was based on magic, for example, like myths, you would have a lot more freedom without having to explain anything. But for gaming, you always have to balance the horror experience, as in like how creepy is it, with the suspension of disbelief, as in are people still going to believe that this is part of the setting that we have created, and gameplay. For horror games, it's a bit different because you're not necessarily saying is it fun to play, but is it creepy to play. And horror games are a bit different, that you take agency away from the player instead of giving them a power fantasy. But it's always these three factors that you have to balance, and that's going to be very difficult with this system. And with all the new stuff they add on top of it, because it was already very difficult when they did.
Yeah.
You've actually just reminded me, when we were talking about the whole spine head flopping about thing, in the very first stream they actually showed that they plan on having limb, like if you dismember a limb, it's not actually falling to the floor, it's actually still partially connected to the necromorph by like just a very few strands of tendons you missed. I'll send the screenshot, so like of the before and after.
I believe it was shown during the audio stream that...
Yeah, the
Yeah.
yeah, it was visible on an audio stream, wasn't it, with the slasher that walks into the pole?
Yeah, that dummy slasher.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. So that was the before, and then after, the limb is like still attached to the body, so to speak.
See, I think that's definitely one way of doing it. But you've got to bear in mind for each of those limbs that you've now sliced off and are physically simulating, you've got to calculate physics for all of them. So again, it'll be an interesting compromise. And again, we're talking from a gameplay perspective and from a game development perspective, because we work with similar systems, so we know the kind of performance pitfalls and problems that you might encounter.
We've run into those before, especially with like previous builds.
So here's a great example, right? It looks great on one. What happens when there's 4 slashes in the room and they've all been shot in different places?
What happens when their limbs interact and they have to collide with each other? Else it will look comical because they're phasing through each other.
See, these are all these really interesting questions you only
Or
really get
if the
asked by
collision-
game developers.
I think
Yeah,
all
we
of
can
you.
only- yeah,
I
we
think
can
all
only
of you have
wait, I
already.
guess.
I think all of you have already seen like what happens if physics break in any game that has ragdoll effects, right? When something suddenly like flies off into the distance like a bucket that you kicked, and it just decides that gravity doesn't exist anymore. What is it? What happens if that happens when you shoot a necromorph and I don't know, suddenly it's a propeller instead of an arm? Does that
Interesting.
destroy your complete horror experience? Possibly. So it's really critical that you get that right.
And again,
Hmm.
by no means are we saying that what they're doing is wrong or what they're saying is bad. What we're saying is we're looking at this from a technical analysis level of the kind of stuff that we've encountered before doing similar systems. Because obviously in the EGX 2019 video, we had a dismemberment system that worked very similar to the original Dead Spaces, in that you could only remove certain limbs, and the models were pre-made so you could blow those certain limbs off. Now, obviously, we've made a much more advanced system now. But the focus of our game's system isn't dismemberment like Dead Space. It's a whole other thing that we yet to reveal. But essentially, we've also encountered these same pitfalls, and we've also encountered the way that immersion can break. So, for example, we had one enemy that was like super creepy, but every time it went into a vent, it would briefly just blip out of the vent and then back in, and it's like, yeah, exactly. My immersion is broken because, and again, there was no way we could fix that at the time because of limitations on our end.
Yeah.
But we're looking into
It's
resolving
also
that.
not necessarily that it breaks your immersion completely. If something comical happens in a tense moment, it breaks the tension, and horror lives off of building tension to a certain point and then breaking, and then doing that cycle over and over again. And if your tension gets broken too often, there's no tense experience anymore. Because you're basically, you get relief too often, so you don't feel suspense or horror.
I mean, we did a bug video, and if you encountered all of those bugs on a regular basis throughout the game because we hadn't playtested it, you'd just be laughing at it and making a bug compilation. You know, the same problem could be happen if you say you shoot all these necromorphs, but not to the point where they're dead, down to the skeleton. Then all of a sudden you're playing spooky, scary skeletons.
I love it. I really want to that's why I can't wait to see what the force gun will be like, because like I wonder if if you fire the force gun at the front of a necromorph, will it just shed all of the skin and leave muscle and the bone's still intact, and like, or if you fire it from the back. So if you fire it so basically like what happens with a nuclear blast and it leaves like that silhouette behind. Like I wonder if you use the force gun on a slasher, it takes all the skin off the front of it but leaves all the back still intact, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think if you used a force gun and it was a realistic weapon, what it would actually do is just fracture every bone in their body and turn them into soup. The skin would probably stay attached,
soup.
and just be degloved almost entirely. So
Just
they
stay-
basically.
Just stay on topic here for a bit. I think
Yeah.
the main issue they would face with a system like this is the complexity, because we only have a few weapons that aren't going to be as heavily modified as Dead Space does with theirs, because they have a crafting system, right? If they bring that into the remake,
The upgrade
Yeah.
system, she means the bench.
yeah, exactly.
Right,
Sorry.
yeah.
Wrong terminology, same thing. So you have different constellations of weapons. You have a very wide selection of weapons you need to balance that system with and test it, which opens a lot of room for weirdness that you might not even be able to test for before release. So I don't think that they will be able to get rid of all the weirdness, but they're probably well aware of the issue. They're all experienced devs. They're not going into this and going like, this is totally non-problematic. We don't have to have an eye on this at all.
Definitely hope for the best with their progress to this, because I definitely don't want to play it and the potential issues you've discussed. Like I don't want them to arise for sure. Like in
cool.
terms of you dismember a ton of necromorphs, or you leave their limbs hanging, or you turn them into skeleton boys. I don't want my PC to start like firing up like a jet engine.
They still have time to optimize all that stuff until the release date, but they still have to make that gameplay stream as they said at the end of the art stream. So yeah, probably it might be optimized by that.
See,
It would certainly make sense. I mean, normally before release, you all knuckle down, and you don't exactly have time to do development live streams.
You might
See, they
also
said-
get a trailer instead, because
The-
once you're at
I was
that
ju-
point, it makes sense to release something more polished to get like the mainstream audience on board, and not people that are following the game
Yeah,
every
that's the
step
thing,
of the way.
Anita. Like, when they mentioned the next thing on October, they didn't actually say a stream. They said they plan on showing off and like an official gameplay thing. I'm not. Well, I don't think they said stream. I thought they said like just there was going to be about the gameplay, like official gameplay sort of thing. So whether that's going to be a gameplay trailer, well, actually, we
No, they did said that they are going to do a gameplay stream on October.
Okay. Well,
I mean, if they're doing it live, I'll take it from one game developer.
Go
If they're going
live.
to stream actual gameplay live, they are very brave.
I mean, there's an
Albert?
actual like they streamed for Uncharted 4. They live streamed their gameplay for what was it, E3 or was it Gamescom? I don't remember. It was one game development conference or
How
the
was it?
other. And there's an achievement in the game called Stage Fright, because when they showcased it live, their controller didn't work and their character didn't move for like the first few minutes.
Oh no.
So showcasing live gameplay is always very risky, and that's the reason why a lot of people go for pre-recorded footage.
I think that's honestly one of the biggest shames. I mean, I always got hyped about E3. Now E3's dead.
That's very sad. When I realized they cancelled the E3 for 2022, I was so disappointed.
Like it was.
I mean, they probably had their reasons on why they canceled the show, especially with everything that
Yeah.
happened in the past.
Yeah,
I was never
yeah,
really
I know
too
the
sad
reasons.
about
So I'm
E3,
just
to
so
be honest.
disappointed.
The thing I preferred was everything was in one place. So you could get hyped about the conference because you'd see these trailers one after another, whereas now it's so disjointed and you have to go to, I don't know, Summer Game Fest, IGN Games of Summer, Nintendo Live, Sony
Oh,
State
right.
of Play. You know, why can't... I liked it when it was all in one place, just because you could sit down and get all this gaming content in one go, and you get all these people excited about it. And yeah, it was cringy, but it was like an actual thing to just nail it all down in one go. Whereas now it's so easy to be like, oh, another live stream showcase event. I'm not going to watch that one.
I think the last live conference like that is actually around Gamescom, and that is the opening night live. I
Yeah,
think the last format that does this.
Apart from the cringe
Um,
moments, it's also had special moments like, for example, the fuck the Oscars guy. That, I don't know, but that day, that man became a
Yeah.
legend.
yeah, that guy from EA, Joseph Fares, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Take Two.
yeah, it takes two game.
Yeah, It Takes Two. Yeah, his speech was incredible.
I want to see Todd Howard. I want to see Todd Howard walk up to TV host and slap a dude for saying he won't buy the next Skyrim port.
oh,
I mean, take it
Keep
from Bethesda.
Skyrim
Everyone
on
loves
your
breaking
fucking
immersion.
console.
I'm kind of glad like the Game Awards aren't as much drama as yours.
Yeah, you get more awkward moments. But definitely not. Yeah, you definitely get. You don't get enough drama, but you do get funny, awkward moments out of it because so not everyone can be as extroverted and charismatic in the gaming industry.
I like that though, because that makes it
Yeah.
more relatable. Because
It
people
does.
that
Yeah.
get these prizes aren't necessarily the people you see a lot. So
Mhm.
it's nice that they're still being able to take those prizes in person. Because you
Yeah.
know for a fact if someone won an Oscar and they were awkward, someone else would take the Oscar in this. And
I think
not
to link it back to the live stream, a great example is the fact that they did all these live streams with the actual developers, and
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily just get a bunch of actors. You could tell they are the actual developers, and when they're breaking down their systems, they're breaking it down because it's what they've worked on, and they understand what they're breaking down. It's not just someone who's been given a script. I do find it interesting that when they do those live streams, the questions that the community representative reel off, they do kind of feel prepared. It doesn't feel like something like this, where it's a bit more of a casual, laid-back environment. But that makes sense, because obviously they've got a lot of key content that they actually need to show. So,
Yeah.
otherwise they'd go off talking about different things like we do here, because this is a more laid-back, casual podcast, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But they know their target audience. I want one of
Yeah.
those Ishimura
There's
t-shirts, though.
also obviously in the background of the Dead Space remake, there's a much bigger corporation. So for us, we're kind of free to talk about most of the stuff that we can talk about. There's obvious stuff we can't talk about, but we kind of determine ourselves what we can and can't talk about yet. For Dead Space, that's very different, right? They have review embargoes, all of these different non-disclosure agreements and plans that the marketing department has for when to reveal what as well in the background. So they have to prepare a question in advance, because if they answer the wrong question, they're not going to be happy.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I'm not sure, are they, when they do those live streams, are they actually live, or are they pre-recorded then streamed? Because I always got the vibe, especially since the first one had a few technical issues, it's proper live. So it makes sense, yeah? Like, they ask a question the development team can't answer. And then they're just like looking at each other on live stream, and it's like, that would be incredibly awkward. So, you know, it makes sense to take that approach.
No, they've done so far on live.
Also
Yeah.
gives you the option to rehearse with people that aren't too comfortable on camera, because one thing that you can hear in the live streams is people that do voiceover, a lot of them feel a bit awkward, they feel a bit like they feel out of place, and you would want to practice with those kinds of people to actually have to be on camera.
Yeah, it's always good to be prepared and stuff, because like even in the like, I wasn't there for like the first podcast episode, but I returned in the second one, and like even I had to like just jot down a few little dot points here and there on potential things to talk about in case we came to a moment where we just either got sidetracked or what is it, we just got lost for words and we didn't know what to bring up next. It's always good to have that little bit of preparedness.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
also
true.
a different layer if you have a... So voiceover or voice chatting like this is very much more casual, especially nowadays that we're all used to doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Thanks,
But being
COVID.
on camera adds another completely different layer to it, because you're much more self-conscious about where you have your hands, where you're looking at, all this kind of stuff. Which, if you look at our devlog,
Yeah,
you
if
can
you look at our
definitely see that we
devlog, you can
struggle with that too.
Yeah, I mean, there's one way of doing it. Don't show your face and do it in game. Yeah, do it afterwards. And that's a really cool approach of doing it, because it kind of, it reminds me of the well, it goes a while back now, Machinima, where they
Well, Machinima's still around. Nvidia made a new version of that.
oh, Machinima is still around. Well,
Yeah, it's now the
what?
Omniverse.
Oh right. Well, what I mean is, you know, like Red versus Blue and all that, where they do like the
Oh, yeah.
Halo Reach fan films or something, but it's all filmed inside Halo Reach.
Oh,
With the
you mean what
characters.
grew into rooster teeth?
Yeah. Fantastic.
Connoisseur.
So, Brody, I know we've tackled a lot of things related to the live stream, which is the actual, I mean, a lot of other things too, but was there
Yeah.
anything particular that we haven't already mentioned that you wanted our kind of input on in regards to what they showed in the live stream? Because I know we've given a lot of input from both a game dev perspective and from a fan's perspective, but if there's anything
Yeah.
in particular that we haven't mentioned yet, I'd love to tackle that next.
What else? I mean, so we've talked about lighting in relation to like environments. We've talked about like flesh textures on a slasher. We've talked about the rust in the environment and on like, you know, Isaac's suit sort of thing. Trying to look for examples of like anything in the stream. Oh God, yeah. All right, yeah. I won't talk about that. I guess pretty much the only other thing possible to talk about are the visual effects in the environment, such as like water drippage and you know, sparks flying and such. Because one of the key moments in the stream that was really cool to see is like the difference between the difference between water dripping out of a pipe and sparks flying from like circuitry in normal gravity and then zero gravity, and seeing
Yeah.
the difference between those.
I think they nailed
Because
that, to be honest.
yeah,
I can't fault VFX in any way. I mean, even the smoke is fantastic because it's volumetric. It's actually deformed by objects. It's reactive. It's clearly emitted and fills in the environment. And the fog and the smoke, well, within Frostbite in general, but obviously within what they've shown is second to none. And whilst the Real Engine can do volumetrics, I'm not sure it's at that same level yet.
Yeah. I've sent the link
Especially with
timestamp in
water,
case any of you need to watch it.
Especially with water, Unreal Engine 5, like when they showcased their own ancient demo, didn't have like the greatest water, and that has kind of persisted throughout with like the standard stuff that they put out.
Because it's always really difficult to do really good looking fluid sims. So
Oh, yeah, it
obviously
is.
they've had someone
Yeah.
on that team who's sat down and gone, right, or basically has been hired. It's their job to make the smoke look as good as possible, and they nailed it
Yes.
because it's got that oily smoke vibe, that kind of like it's thick, it's
It
industrial. feeling.
lingers.
It lingers, yeah, like kind of like toxic. And
Something
obviously,
that could kill you if you breathe it enough,
when
probably.
when we did our heavy suit escape sequence in the trailer, we looked at doing like thick toxic fog like that. But obviously at the time we didn't have access to the volumetric tools, obviously within Unreal Engine 4. So we faked it as accurately as we could. But obviously it's not going to look as good as actually being volumetric as they showed with the battery, the I don't know what it's called again, the battery pack they were waving around in the fog, and it was like moving the fog as it went through it. It was actually breaking the fog up. The VFX look fantastic, like incredibly lifelike, and also the way they were showing how the explosions and the sparks and the waterworks, without sounding like too blunt, but like, you know, if they got that wrong, that's a pretty critical bit to get wrong. It's
Yeah,
Dead
yep.
Space. Zero G is a very key part of that game, and nailing the feeling of Zero G with the visual effects is the easiest way to do it. Like, for example, when you play through the original Dead Space, the first time you go through the spacewalk, the kind of the color temperature of everything changes. It feels cold, but then you see the
Yeah.
bubbles, and the bubbles just floating around in space.
Yeah, both
You
for
know
blood
you're in
and
space.
water.
Exactly, both for blood and water. So it's great that they're doing this again, but I think the way that they can now use the sparks, for example, in the water, they are GPU particles. So originally you had CPU particles, which were basically like 2D sprites, kind of like the original Doom games. That's how they did it, but they couldn't collide with anything. Now you can use things called GPU particles, which use the actual scene's depth buffer to basically fake collisions. So sparks can bounce off the floor and hit walls, and we use that quite a lot. But it allows for significantly higher realism. Like a great example is, you know, if something sparks, the sparks are going to fly off the board. They're going to hit the floor and they're going to bounce off the floor. And as they do that, they're actually going to emit light. So you're in a dark room and it sparks. It lights the whole room up. You know, you couldn't do that before. And,
No, you had to fake it.
You had to fake it, exactly, and that's never going to look right because faking sparks with a point light, they're such tiny little sources of light that you can't accurately fake it with just a point light. You need to have it emitted by the actual emissive material, the bit that glows.
There's also one that's also is quite new. So meshes usually didn't emit light in game, and you would have to place
Really?
a light. So if you made a fluorescent light bulb, right? So the light bulb itself might glow visibly, but it wouldn't emit light. So you had to place a light right next to that light bulb that would emit the light that you were trying to project from the bulb.
Which is exactly
Because-
what we did in our vertical slice.
And that is something that a lot of the Unreal Engine 5 and a lot of the more modern game engines are going into now. That actual objects are emitting the light, which is much more performance intensive, or would have been with the old techniques we were using.
But now you can do it, and as they showed it in their live stream, they had the slasher in the room and it had all the balls, and it was calculating this thing called bounce lighting. Well, bounce lighting is essentially doing that, but they're using a light there. But Lumen in Unreal Engine 5 calculates the emissive as an actual physical light source, and then also calculates the bounce lighting, and that's how you get realistic light. Because obviously, when a light casts from your ceiling, it casts down onto the floor, but it doesn't just cast down to the floor. It then bounces off the floor back at the ceiling, and it bounces up to the walls and different things. That's exactly what ray tracing is. It's
This is
tracing
what
a
they
ray.
showcased, like in 2018-19, when was it 18 or 19 when they announced like the major RTX on, RTX off memes things.
Exactly,
went
it's
through the
tracing a
community.
ray from the light
Yeah.
source to the floor and back up. Before, video games had to guess and approximate it because they did not have the power to trace 100 million lights or whatever. With RTX and with ray tracing, and with now Lumen software ray tracing, you can get a hell of a lot more accurate, and that's what bounce lighting is. We used to have to fake bounce lighting. That's what fill lighting is. You place a light floating in the sky, like literally in the middle of the room. It jumps to the end of the room, and it's low brightness, so it kind of fakes that feeling of light. They don't have to do that anymore.
What's important for that to know also is there's two different kinds of lighting. In like traditional game engines, there's static lighting and there's dynamic. So static lighting, you place light, and it does have global illumination because it calculates bounce, but it bakes that into a texture. So it can't change while the game runs. So it always stays the same no matter what your character does. It's great for creating fake ambient light. So if you want the corridor to be brighter, you add a bunch of lights, you bake them, and then it's always going to be a bit brighter, but it's never going to be completely dark either. And the great thing about dynamic light is it changes at runtime. So you can turn them off. If you, for example, shoot out the bulb, the light will turn off and will be actually going completely dark. The problem was always before that it's quite expensive to do. And now it's no longer as much of an issue. So much more games have a lot more dynamic lighting, or even all of their lighting be completely dynamic.
And as they showed that in the Dead Space remake with the quarantine system, where all the lights go out and the quarantine alarms come on, you can only do that with realistic modern lighting. And they were also showing how both the fluorescent, I really like this detail, the fluorescent lights respond to power differently to LED halogen lights or whatever.
Oh yeah, they were
LED
showing the
lights,
3
halogen
different
lights.
lights.
Yeah, that was a great showcase. It's
all
another
done.
thing, one of those things that no one is going to actively notice, but it's going to add passively to your experience.
Exactly, because all the light flickers at a different frequency, but also because they're probably using like material functions for that, where basically you're just driving the emissive value of the light source, and that's multiplied by the actual intensity of the light. It's quite low intensity, but you couldn't do it with old lights because you're recalculating lighting so quick that if you actually tried to flicker it, the light would just stay because the computer could not calculate the light once it goes off, and when it goes on 60 times a second, because that's what a 60 hertz bulb flickers at. That's why you can see it flickering. So they could do a lot more realistic kind of what's the word, photosensitive horror than they could with the original, because they can really give you that feeling of being under a dentist lamp, for example, where it has that very almost sickening cold flicker. It's not smooth, it's not consistent. So there's a lot more they can do there. Same with the alarms, right? The alarms can spin, and in the original Dead Space they did that, but they didn't really, and they did cast shadows, but now they can do it properly because it's photorealistic lighting.
As far as I've seen, they also use something called IES profiles, which is basically a 3D representation of how a light bulb emits light. So if you've ever had different light bulbs against a wall, you know how they throw different patterns on the wall based on what kind of a light bulb you have. You see that often in like people lighting their gardens. Yeah, like what Calvin just posted in the chat. And if you use digital lights, they all just uniformly emit light, which is why they look slightly unrealistic. And that is why in Engine we use light profiles from real bulbs to make them look like real bulbs. You can also make your own ones, obviously, but a lot of people just use libraries of these because
otherwise you get this.
Yeah, so that's just a straight up light cone. And that adds a lot that you wouldn't be aware of as a consumer, but you will notice the difference if you see one with and one without.
So there you go.
It's interesting looking at the picture of all these different light cones.
Yeah, we use IES light profiles heavily because it's a really easy way of accurately simulating a certain bulb. But it's the same way.
Also, a good way of getting variation into your lighting because you're not going to have always the same bulbs in every room. Like not even in your home. You replace them as they break, right?
Yeah,
and also, like they were also mentioning in the live stream. Sorry, it's getting a bit late here, so my brain's starting to go. But they were mentioning temperatures. So rather than using color to drive light, they were using temperatures from to 1,000 degrees Kelvin to 12,000 degrees Kelvin.
Which is the physically accurate way of doing it.
Which is the physically accurate way of doing it. Which means that they can use real light bulbs, and they can find an actual light bulb, and any light bulb you can buy will tell you its temperature in Kelvin. LED light bulbs are typically colder, that's a higher Kelvin value. between over 6,500 and typical fluorescent light bulbs or filament light bulbs. They're typically warmer just because of the materials that they use.
Daylight, for example, is usually classified.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a good threshold.
When you light using lighting temperature, you get scenes that automatically look more realistic because you are used to seeing those lights in your everyday life.
The one thing that you also see in the screenshot that posted
cool.
is that they're using cookies, which is something that in Unreal Engine we call light. It's a technique that came over from movies, where you basically, if you want that noir look of like blinds, for example, and you don't have blinds on your set, you were just holding a bunch of blinds up to the light you were using to create the same kind of effect on the character's face, even if the window didn't line up. And that kind of stuff implies depth where there is none. So you have a light that's just shining from somewhere and there's no mesh actually breaking it up, so you just get a boring round light cone. But if you break it up by having a pattern in front of it, be it a grate or blinds or something similar, like partially open door or just a plane that kind of gives it a more interesting shape. That's something they call cookies in film, and it's kind of interesting to get terminology used here. And it adds a lot of interest to your lighting that it normally wouldn't have.
I'm glad you explained it, because as soon as when I saw with cookie texture, I just assumed it was because they were going with a circular shape.
Yeah, so
like that's
No.
the only reason, basically.
Actually, the cookie with cookie texture is the lower part of the image.
Yeah.
Without is the upper part. So yeah.
So the thing with the cookie texture as well, particularly in this one, is the one they're using that's circular, is if you ever have a flashlight, right, and you shine I'm not talking like on your phone, I'm talking like an actual flashlight, like a mag light. When you actually shine that on something, is the beam consistent everywhere you shine it, or is it slightly brighter in the middle, then it goes dimmer again, and then it goes even brighter? So here's a great example. This is an actual flashlight being shined at a wall. See that?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's that in a video game. If you want to simulate that accurately, you use a cookie, which is basically a texture which maps basically brightness, and rather than having to calculate, you basically like physically put the material that's causing that in front of the light. So you have a light, and then you have like an actual glass material that's causing that, because that's incredibly expensive to render. You fake it. You just say, okay, this light is only going to cast these values of light with this texture. So you can do that, and IES profiles, and color temperature lighting, and cookies that aren't just like stuff like that. You're easily going to get a much more photorealistic environment.
Yeah,
For a
and suddenly
significantly
additional
lower
lights
cost.
look like actual light.
Yeah, exactly. So there you
Definitely
go.
noticed. Sorry.
That's coming
the-
from a lighting artist, because I've done all the lighting for the stuff that we've shown.
Yeah.
So, I'm speaking from experience here, that is by far the best way to make a scene feel real when it comes to the lighting. And it's like we say, you can have crap models but great lighting, and the scene will look fantastic. If you've got great models and great lighting, it'll look photo real.
Can't wait to be in a decontamination room and see like the different kinds of lighting they're going to have with like before the decontamination actually starts to when it does. And and also when they if they're assuming in the remake they'll do what they did in the original, where the quarantine like shuts halfway through and everything just goes pitch black, and necromorphs start coming in. That'll be very cool to see. Aside from that, that's pretty much everything for like the stream and such. The we pretty much touched on like, all the main points. Yeah.
Have you seen the chat?
Yeah, saw that. We're definitely gone over the time we were originally talking about.
Yeah, what were you saying, Calvin? 1 hour only?
Oh well, I guess we had fun.
Yeah, we did. Had a lot of fun.
Well,
I mean, basically we've been like for 2
but
hours.
you're all fine with it, with the length? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's because we had such a fantastic host, so.
We'll be fine.
thank
At least
you.
tomorrow is Sunday, so there's no one actually.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not a live podcast either.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I'll just sue Calvin for making me work at 2 a.m.
But so yeah, that's pretty much everything. So well, I'd like to thank you two, Calvin and Anita, for joining us for this episode. It's been great having you on and seeing like your perspectives on
No worries.
on a
It's been
stream
a pleasure.
yeah, not just even just on Dead Space itself, but just gaming like development as a whole. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you.
Great
I
being
hope
here.
I hope your viewers feel the same when they listen to us ramble on about video game design. Yeah,
Yeah, they're gonna get some deep lore drops about gaming development out of this.
absolutely. Brilliant.
Any
Right,
final words
well,
from you two?
thank you for having us on, and I'm very tired now.
Get
Thank
some
you for having
Z's.
us and like listen to us about rambling about lighting. To be honest,
It's been great having you two on board.
Yeah, it's actually really good to just kind of see how awestruck you both were when we explained maybe they made it brown because of technical reasons. And not
I mean,
just
we've been
because of
talking for like
design.
2 hours.
And you were like literally just like the Omega Brain head exploding gif.
Yeah. That just give. Yeah.
So yeah, that was really fun to impart some knowledge on you all.
it's weird because for us this is just everyday work stuff, so it's always interesting to see how other people react to it.
Yeah, like in our case, being like a total different species trying to understand what you said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you two are Homo sapiens, and we're just fucking cavemen still, like Neanderthals. We're Neanderthals.
Well, I would say more like Ooga Boongas, like trying to understand what they said.
Unga bunga, what is cookie texture?
Uh,
But yeah,
Takes the
all
cookie
good.
text and tries to eat it.
Well, with that said, I hope everyone enjoyed this podcast episode, and yeah, Helios, I think you got a lot of work to do now.
you think so? But yeah, I also have a lot of work to do.
Sigh, sighs in pain. All right, thanks everyone for watching.